If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to dogmanencounters.com/podcast. Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us for another live stream episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. We really appreciate you joining us. In our day-to-day lives, it's funny how we take so many things for granted. It's almost like we get too comfy and we think we know what's coming and what we shouldn't have to worry about, what can't happen to us in our lives. Well, tonight's guest is a testament to the fact that while we all might think we have a certain level of control of our lives, things can hit us just out of the blue that you never saw coming. You wouldn't even imagine could possibly happen. I'm not going to get into details on that right now. I'm going to let tonight's guest explain to you what happened to him. And when he does, it's just going to blow your mind the way it blew my mind when he told me about what had gone down. Without any further ado, let's bring tonight's guest on. Tonight's guest is Ryan. Ryan, thanks so much for coming to the show.
Coming back to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming back. You're right. For everyone listening, Ryan was a guest. He was featured on episode 250. And like he brought to my attention before we started tonight, here this is episode 550. So this is exactly 300 episodes later that he's back. I hate the idea.
Exactly. I passed go 300 times, but unfortunately did not collect the $200.
Yeah, you did. I like the fact that you're back tonight so we get to catch up on what you've been going through, except for one aspect of it, of course,
right.
Listeners are going to hear. But yeah, I hate the idea that you're back because you had another encounter. That's not good.
No, Dogman encounter is never good, but it can be educating. That's for sure.
Yes, it can. Yeah, they almost always are. And speaking of that, I saw a comment in the live chat before we went live where someone said that they hope it's a good one tonight. They think it's going to be a good one. Well, there are no good Dogman encounters except ones that never happened in the first place. I tried to make a comment on that in the live chat, but I got a message from YouTube that YouTube thought my comment was actually spam, so it blocked it. There's some interesting problems with doing this the live stream way, I'm telling you.
I think their algorithm might be broken on that one.
Might be. Yeah, if it's not one thing, it's been the other and all. I've been having problems. But anyway, like I told you before, Ryan, I'm so glad that you're here. Thanks again so much for coming back. We really do appreciate your time.
That's no problem.
We do. And for all the listeners who might have missed episode 250, which that's been about 5 years now, 4 to 5 years, please tell us about yourself. Please give us a bio.
So, my name's Ryan. At the time of the first episode, I was 23 or 24. I'm 29 now, so I'm getting on up there. Born and raised in North Georgia. For the longest time, the Chattahoochee National Forest was my backyard. It covers pretty much all of North Georgia and a vast part of Tennessee and the Carolinas as well. And I grew up in those mountains, fishing, camping, hiking, off-roading. I'm a huge car enthusiast, a huge Jeep enthusiast. If I wasn't working or, once I graduated, if I wasn't at school, if you were looking for where I was probably up there somewhere. So I've spent my whole life out in the woods, and I thought that I had encountered everything that there was, but I found out one night that I was sorely mistaken. So this was, probably 2017. It's been 7 years ago that this encounter happened, probably. I had two friends, Colin and Walker, and it was a Friday night. And they called me, and they were like, well, hey, we've got nothing going on tonight. Are you busy? I'm like, no, I'm not doing anything at all this week. And why? What's up? And Colin, he was from a place up in West Virginia called Ghent. And Walker, he was from Los Angeles. So Colin, he grew up in the Appalachian Mountains. So he was, a big burly redneck dude. Walker, he was a complete city slicker. He had never really been deep in the woods. He'd been fishing and camping, but, glamping more would be described as what he would do. So he was like, I think it would be cool to take Walker deep up in the mountains and take him, on some trails and mud riding and whatever. I was like, yeah, let's do it. Well, it was during the summertime, and it had rained for a lot of that week, and actually the week before, we were just having torrential downpours. And if anyone that is listening has ever off-roaded, especially rock crawling, rain changes the dynamic of the trail. So by the grace of God, we had the top and doors on my Jeep because I did not feel like cleaning mud out from the interior the next day. Well, we get up to the trail. It was early in the morning. I can't remember the exact time, but it was after midnight, probably 1:32 in the morning, if I had to guess. And we're going through the trail. We're doing the easy part. We're getting up to the hard part. We do the first initial hard part, and we get up to a much easier, basically a dirt road section that bridges the hard sections. And I think it was Colin and told me that he needed to take a leak. And I'm like, yeah, I got to also. So we get out, go to opposite sides of the trail, take a leak. Well, we're going to get back into my Jeep, and that is when we initially heard the first call of the Dogman. It was this, I described it last time as a howl, screech, scream, all mashed up into one demonic noise. And to this day, I still stand by that. That is the best description that I have of it. And we get back in the Jeep, and Walker, he didn't actually get out. It was just me and Colin that got out. And we look in the back seat, and he was like, what in the world was that? And the truth was, I didn't even know what it was. Like I said, I'd been in the woods my whole life, and I had never heard anything that sounded anything like that at all. I was thinking it was like a coyote in distress, or it was a bobcat, or it was some kind of bear that, was, had some kind of deformity or something. Because, everything that came to mind was an animal that was not right. That's the only things that came to mind, was that's an animal that's not right some way, somehow. Well, Colin gave me this look, and it was this look like, I don't know what that was either, but I don't want to say anything, because Walker had never been in the woods, and we were trying to introduce him to the woods as like, hey, this is a safe haven. You're good here. It turns out that terrible introduction. Anyway, so we get up to the next hard section, and this section is a lot more technical. And we are coming up to, it was actually the entrance right before it, and the headlights caught something. And I had LED headlights in the Jeep. They were aftermarket, and they were ridiculously bright. If I was going down the road at night and flicked the high beams on, they would light up street signs, 3/4 of a mile away. And that's no exaggeration. They were insanely bright. And the cutoff for the low beams was a pretty good distance. So I caught something in the cutoff of the low beams, and I hit the brakes, and I was like, did you see that? My friend looked at me, and he goes, no, what? He missed it. He didn't see it. He goes, no, what was it? I was like, I don't know. So I flicked the high beams on. And when I flicked the high beams on, in the middle of the road on all fours was a creature like I had never seen before. And the first thing, this is the part that stuck out, to this day, it sticks out to me the most. The thing that I noticed right away was its coat. Its coat absorbed every bit of light that those headlights were putting off. Like I said, these were full aftermarket housing LED headlights, specifically for Wranglers, specifically for off-roading. They are stupidly bright, and they reflect off of everything. They did not reflect off of this Dogman's coat. It absorbed it like a black hole. And that was the thing that stood out to me initially. I was like, wow. I was like, the coat on that bear is unlike anything I've ever seen. I've seen brown bears. I've seen black bears. In my travels out west, I've seen grizzly bears. I had never seen a bear that had a coat like that. Well, that's when it stood up. And I very quickly realized that that was not a bear. So it stood up, and this thing on its back legs, probably in relation to how big my Jeep was maybe 7.5, 8 feet at the most tall. It was huge. And Walker, he's like, that's a werewolf. I'm like, no. I was like, I didn't know what it was, but I was trying to calm him down because the last thing I needed was him freaking out. I was like, no. I was like, it's a bear. I was like, you're good. It's just a bear. It's got mange. It's a bear. I was just trying to play it off. And then it just was gone. Like, a snap. It was gone. It just disappeared. And I had never seen anything move that fast. And it honestly moved so fast that at first I thought we were all hallucinating. Like, did we actually all just see that? Because there is nothing that can just be there and be gone that quick. But Dogman can. So we keep going up the trail. we finally get to the super hard part of the hard part. And like I said, it's super wet, super technical. I'm having to go really, really slow because if you go fast, you risk breaking your vehicle. And it was just us, just the one vehicle. I didn't have any way to repair my vehicle if it broke up there because all of my tools and all of my spare parts were in my garage. So I was going slow. Well, we heard that screech again, except this time it was a lot closer. And for some reason, I hit the brakes. And when I did, in the rear view mirror, in the rear window of my Jeep, I saw this thing. And its head filled up the entire rear window of my Wrangler. Now, I had a soft top, an aftermarket soft top, and from one corner of the other, and I did measure this actually, from one corner of the other, that top is, or the window is 36 inches diagonally. This thing filled up almost all of the rear window. Then I saw the claws. The claws drug from one corner of the window all the way down. And if anyone knows anything about Jeeps or those polyurethane soft windows that they have, they can be punctured actually quite easily, but it's never a clean slice. You could take the sharpest knife you have in your kitchen, go up to one, and it'll puncture it, but if you drag it, it's going to catch and it's going to actually stretch the plastic versus, actually slice through it. It's more of a stretch than a slice. This thing's claws were so sharp, and they were probably half an inch wide to an inch wide. They were huge. This thing's claws were so sharp that it was a clean slice. And when I say clean, I mean surgically precise slice. And I threw caution to the wind. I said, screw this. I was like, if I break my vehicle, I break my vehicle, but I'd rather have that than anything else. And I hightailed it out of there. I mean, I rally car status that Jeep through that trail. And then we finally got back onto the main road, which took us down through Helen, Georgia, through Cleveland, Georgia, and then back down to where I was from. And nothing was really said. The only thing that was said, and I think it was my friend Colin that said it, he always had a very dry sense of humor, and he was trying to lighten the situation because none of us could really wrap our minds around what we saw. And he was like, well, hell, Ryan, you'd never told me that trail took us to Skyrim. I was just like, yeah. I was like, yeah, cool. But the whole time I'm thinking, like, what in God's name was that? And for a long time, it was something I would think about, but then I would forget it happened. And then something just out of the blue would remind me, like, oh, yeah, I wonder what that thing was on that trail that night. And for about a year and a half, somewhere around there, I just sort of occasionally would wonder, like, what was that? Well, I was selling cars at the time, and I actually got out of the car sales industry and started working for a collision center as a manager. We needed a receptionist, so I hired a lady whose name was Denise. And Denise, she came on, and one thing that I like to do when I hired new people is all the people that worked the front end, I would buy them all lunch, and we would sit in the conference room and we'd all have lunch together so we could all get to know each other. So we're sitting around the table, and I'm letting Denise introduce herself, and she was like, I was like, well, Denise, what's one fun fact about you? That's one thing I would ask all new hires. So like, give us one fun, quirky, random, off-the-wall fact about you, so something we can make fun of you for, or get, something we'll have in common, or whatever it is. And she goes, well, I used to be a paranormal investigator. And everyone just sort of stopped eating because, whether you believe in the paranormal, whether it be cryptids or ghosts or spirits or whatever, whether you believe or not, paranormal stuff has a very, very good way of drawing even non-believers in. Even if you take them just for their story value, they're great stories, and people love listening to anything paranormal. So I was already hooked. I was like, okay, this woman's going to be cool. I need to talk to her. Well, she threw a question back at us. She was like, well, how many of y'all have had a paranormal encounter? She goes, or just any encounter that you cannot explain. And, we had the typical sort of mix of responses. Oh, when I was a kid, my door would open randomly, or, yeah, my grandmother's house, we would hear whispers in the night, or whatever. She looked at me just dead in the eyes. It's almost like she knew. She was like, well, what about you, Ryan? You ever had anything that you just can't explain happened? And it was like, okay, God, you've put this woman in my life for some reason, but I'm about to find out why. I told her, I was like, yeah. I was like, but I don't want to go into it right now. I was like, before we leave tonight, though, I was like, come find me. I was like, and we'll walk out to our cars together, and now I'll tell you what happened. She goes, oh, okay. Well, that night comes, and she comes to my office, knocks on the door. She goes, all right. She goes, walk with me. So I walk with her, excuse me, and she goes, well, normally when I ask anyone if they've ever had a paranormal encounter and they say, yes, I'll tell you, but I just want to be one-on-one. She goes, what they saw was either really made up or it was really real. I was like, well, I can tell you that what I saw was really real. It was definitely not really made up. I was like, and I've got two of my best friends as witness also. And I told her the same story that I just told y'all. And she was like, well, that sounds to me like a Dogman. I'm like, Dogman? And I was like, I've never heard of a Dogman. And she's like, oh, yeah, a lot of people haven't. I was like, I've heard of Bigfoot. I've heard of Mothman. I've heard of Skinwalkers. I've heard of all this stuff. I was like, but I've never heard of Dogman. And she goes, oh, yeah. She goes, well, do some Googling. She goes, look it up. See what you think. See if that matches what you saw. So that night when I went home, I went on YouTube and just looked up Dogman. Actually saw your channel, but I kept scrolling down because I was wanting to find videos, people captured it on camera or whatever. And I came across a video, and I cannot remember now what the title of it was. But the premise of the video was two guys, I think they were actually about teenagers or even younger. They were out in the woods somewhere just filming, just randomly filming, not filming anything in particular. And while they were filming, they unknowingly captured a Dogman looking around like a tree trunk or a stump, or it was looking around something at them. And when they went back to view the video, I guess that's when they saw it, and they edited it to slow it down, and they put it on YouTube. Like I said, I can't remember what the name of that video was. It's been so long ago. But when I saw the slowed down portion where the head came around the corner of the tree, it sent a chill down my spine. I text Colin, sent him the link to it, and I was like, watch this. Tell me this is not what we saw on the trail a year and a half ago. And he watched it, and he responded back very quickly, actually. And he was like, wow, B. He goes, to a T. He goes, that is exactly the face that we saw in your rear window. And from there, I started doing more research, went back to your channel, started listening to some of, the stories and all that. Found your website and submitted my initial story. And he was like, yeah, I would love to be on your show. And that was show 250, and now here we are, 300 episodes later.
Yeah,
but yeah,
it is really hard to believe that so many episodes have gone by.
I know, 4 or 5 years. I'm knocking on the door of 6, I think.
Yeah, getting pretty close. Really
it
close,
is.
I'd say. It was asked in the chat. I probably shouldn't ask this until after you've told us about your second encounter, but I want to address this now. Of all the movie werewolves out there, which one would you say most closely resembles the one that was looking through the back window?
Okay, what's funny is I am not much of a movie watcher, and I actually don't really get into horror movies, believe it or not. When it comes to movies, I am a classic James Bond and Indiana Jones type of guy. My favorite movie, though, is Oppenheimer. Fantastic if y'all have never seen it. But werewolf movies, believe it or not, I've never actually really watched a lot of them. If anyone has ever played Skyrim, and you've come across the werewolves that are down in like the swamplands in the woods, that is the closest thing that I can think of to this, is a video game reference of all things. But take the creature from Skyrim and put the head of a Doberman on it, and that is pretty much how I would describe it.
Well, that doesn't paint a pretty picture, does it?
No, definitely not.
Yeah, I'd say it doesn't. I touched on this right at the very top of the show, where I was talking about how you think that you know what to expect out of life. You don't expect any true blindsides or anything like that. But what I'm getting at here is, unfortunately, you spent 4 years in prison due to a crime you didn't commit. Please talk us through all that.
Right. So it actually happened not long after I was on your show. So in 2017, I bought my Jeep. And I'm going to leave the name of the financial institution out of this just because I don't want to get sued. But the financial institution that I financed my Jeep through had a data breach. And a lot of people's identities got stolen. Mine was one of them. Well, my identity ended up on the dark web. And whoever purchased it from the dark web used my identity to create accounts on the dark web to try to then commit further crimes. I mean, a whole host of financial crimes, money laundering, I mean, all kinds of things. The state of Georgia has some very, very interesting policies and very interesting laws pertaining to identity crimes. And one of those things is basically if your identity is stolen, and whether it be people opening accounts that you can't pay for or people committing crimes using your identity, you are held responsible for what is done with your identity, which blows my mind. So it was probably actually a little bit longer after I went off your show, because the actual crime, quote unquote, happened in March of 18. My identity was stolen sometime in late 2017. The crime was actually, or crimes were actually committed in March of 2018. I did not get arrested for them until December 23rd of 2019. I spent 14 months in county jail fighting them. This was right when COVID started, so everything was postponed, and I was not able to get a bond hearing. Finally did get a bond hearing in February of 2021, so that's actually longer than 14. Well, no, that is 14 months. Yeah, 14 months later, get a bond, get out on bond. I'm out on bond for 9 months again, trying to fight this charge. And the public defender, because I didn't have money to get my own lawyer, not for 7 different felonies. They were wanting a ridiculous amount. They were wanting like $35,000-$40,000 to take my case on, and I just didn't have it. So I had to settle with a public defender. She basically told me that you have 2 options. She goes, you can go to trial, and we can try to convince the jury that you were not the one behind the computer, taking all these people's money and everything. She goes, or you can take a plea deal. I was like, okay, well, what are we looking at both ways? Because I was wanting to go to trial. I really was, because I'm like, I shouldn't have to take a plea deal for something that I know I didn't do. And we had proved that I didn't do it, because the date that these crimes were supposedly committed, which they were supposedly committed out of Indiana, I'm in Georgia, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, something's off there. I wasn't even in Georgia. I was actually in Nashville, Tennessee, but they didn't care about that. My lawyer goes, well, if you go to trial and lose, they're going to hit you with the maximum. They always do. I was like, well, what's the maximum? She goes, 25 years. And I sort of was like, okay. I'm like, so if we take a plea deal, what are we looking at there? And she goes, 4 years, followed by 6 years of probation. I was like, that's a big difference between a plea deal and going to trial. I'm like, so they're going to offer me 4 years 4 years in prison, followed by 6 years of probation for taking a plea deal. But if I go to trial and fight for myself, they want to give me 25? I'm like, that's insane. And the only reason I actually ended up taking the plea deal is, one, they were willing to drop 5 of my charges, actually 6 of my charges, and just plea out to 2 different charges. Misuse of identity, which is very ironic to me, because I'm like, okay, I'm the one that got the identity stolen, but you're charging me with felony misuse of identity? How does that make sense? This is my identity. And then 1 count of money laundering over the amount of $20,000. So I ended up taking a plea deal. I don't want to say that I was railroaded, but I was railroaded. I was thinking more of my family in the long run than I was really myself. My mom, she's 60. I knew that, well, she's 60 now. She wasn't at the time. I knew that if I took a plea deal and did my 4 years and got out, I could still continue to fight it, but I would be able to see my mother again. She would still be, healthy enough and young enough that I could still have good, healthy, solid, long-term interaction with her. I knew that if I went to trial and lost, which the way the Georgia laws are set up, basically it's designed for you to lose, there was a very good chance that I would never get to see my mother again. And that is not something that I wanted to have to face. So I took the plea deal thinking of my mother and my brother and my grandmother more than I was of myself. Do I regret that? Not really. Do I wish it never happened? Absolutely. But in retrospect, when you are talking about being able to see your mother continue to age healthfully and know that you have plenty of years more left with her, I would take that plea deal 5 times over if I had to, if it meant, being back out with my mom. But that's how I ended up with 4 years of my life wasted in Georgia State prison system.
Holy cow, Ryan, that's
Yeah.
absolutely horrible. It really is. You're
Yeah.
put into a really difficult situation that there was no good way out of. You just dealt with it the best way you knew how. And yeah, that's a situation, like I said, that could happen to any of us. And
It
it's
is.
important to not lose sight of the fact that it could possibly happen. It's best not to get
Yes.
too comfy in your life because you never know when something like that might come around. You really don't.
Well, a bit of advice to anyone that is listening: invest in LifeLock. It doesn't have to be like name brand, but a lot of banks, they offer LifeLock. Please, please, please do what you can to safeguard your identity, because I never did. And I thought I was one of those, oh, it'll never happen to me things. Well, going to prison is another, it'll never happen to me thing. Please do things that you need to do to safeguard your identity, because if they have stuff that monitors the dark web, and if your identity shows up, they can actually shut it down when they find it. If I had that at the time, I wouldn't be here right now. I would never have gone to prison. So please, y'all, get some kind of identity lock, whatever it is. Please do.
Yeah, that's very good advice for the aforementioned reasons. Well, Ryan, I guess it's time now. Please tell us about this most recent encounter. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay. So, in prisoners, they refer to prisons as camps. So y'all are going to hear me use some prison lingo, and I'll explain sort of what some of the prison lingo means. So maybe y'all learn something. But the first camp that I was at was way, way, way in South Georgia. We were like 2 counties up from the Florida border. In a city called Morgan, Georgia. The closest big city down there was Albany. Spent 18 months there. The second camp that I was at is in the city of Millen, Georgia. And Millen, Georgia is a suburb of Augusta. It's about 45 minutes to an hour south of Augusta. We're not far, or it wasn't far from the South Carolina border. In fact, that whole area is called the CSRA, which stands for Central Savannah River Area. And it encompasses, Augusta and the north side of Macon and, a whole bunch of just small little farming towns up there. Well, Jenkins County, which is where the city of Millen is, there are 2 sources of employment for this county. You have your 2 options are: you can be a farmer or you can work at the prison. There's nothing else. There is the farms and there is the prison. Well, the land that the prison was on was actually owned by a farmer, and the officers that worked the prison, the correctional officers, they would describe this farmer as the Donald Trump of Millen. Donald Trump owns, most of New York City. Well, this dude owns most of Jenkins County as far as the, land that has not been developed on. If there's something the way they word it is, if you see land down here that is not built on, he owns it. Okay, fair enough. Well, the back of the prison, it faced one of his fields. And it was a rotational field. And what I mean by that is sometimes they would have cotton planted, sometimes they would have corn planted. When this happened, it was corn crop out there. And if anyone's ever been in any farmland, anywhere they grow corn, corn can grow really, really, really tall. It's a very, very tall crop. Well, it was the summer of 23. And I'm laying back in my bunk, and we had 2 different rec yards. Well, actually, let me start with the rec yards. We had 2 different rec yards. We had the big yard and we had the small yard. Now, the big yard, it was for the whole compound. The housing areas are referred to as dorms by inmates, and a dorm is nothing more than where the inmates, you have the day room, which is where the TVs and the tables and all that are. You have the cuts, which is where the bunks are, and then you have the bathrooms and the showers and all that in the back. Well, there are 3 buildings on site. Well, 4 if you include where the chow hall and all that is, the cafeteria. There's 3 buildings that house inmates, and they are broken up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different dorms. I had to count in my head. There's 10 separate dorms. Well, the rec yard was open. The big yard was open throughout the week, but each day it was Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Each day it was a different building. We had 100 building, 200 building, and 300 building. I was in 300 building, which means our rec time, our big yard time, was on Fridays. So it was the middle of summer, and in south central Georgia, which this is really middle Georgia, but anywhere south of Atlanta, it is a sweat box. Even if it's nice and cool in the morning, the humidity is still going to just drench you. So I didn't feel like going out. I was laid back in my bunk reading. Well, all of a sudden, they'd been out for maybe half an hour. And when they open up Big Yard, it's open up all day. So they're out for like half an hour. It's, mid-morning. All of a sudden, everyone starts coming back in. And they're being rounded up by officers. Like, get back to your dorms. Get back to your dorms. We got to lock down. We got to lock down. I'm like, wow. I was thinking that something had happened on the compound. And that's what everyone was thinking. So in prisons, there is a big issue with contraband cell phones. Inmates will pay correctional officers to smuggle in like straight talk phones for them. And they use those phones to get in touch with other people on the compound, people at different prisons, their family and friends that are out there on the street. They use it to basically run their lives as normal as they can while they're in prison, but they're illegal. You're not supposed to have them. They're contraband. So the people that had the phones, they start pulling them out, incognito, trying to hide them from the cameras, hide them from the officers. And they're trying to shoot off messages to whoever they can, people at this prison, people at other prisons, like, hey, we just went on lockdown. Did something happen in one of y'all's buildings, or did something happen in one of the prisons that's near us? Because that area of the state is super saturated with prisons. There's prisons all over down there because of how rural it is. It's close enough to major cities that people from the cities can commute if they want, but it's rural enough that people are comfortable with having a whole bunch of hoodlums down there, for lack of a better term. Well, we find out that, there's nothing going on. Nothing happened here at the prison. Nothing happened in any other prisons. Everything, it's smooth sailing as far as the Georgia Department of Corrections goes. It's, smooth sailing from here. We're on good waters. So we're scratching our heads like, well, what in the world happened? And the officers were really, really bad about not keeping us informed about what was going on. So we were just sort of left to speculate. But there was one officer, he worked overnights, cannot remember what his name was for the life of me. But we were finally like, hey, what is going on? Why are we on lockdown? Because lockdown, it is a pain for officers. Like, they tried to avoid lockdown except for the most extreme circumstances, because everything has to come to us. Our food, medical, if you take medication, they have something called pill call. They would have to bring the pill cart down, which we called Pills on Wheels. They would have to bring that down to us, and it just made everything so much more of a hassle. It took a 10-minute ordeal and made it into an hour-and-a-half problem. So they would avoid everything that they could to put us on lockdown. So the fact that they put us on lockdown told us that something major had happened, but we couldn't figure out what. Well, we finally were able to find out. And he said, well, he goes, I'll tell y'all, he goes, but y'all cannot tell anyone that it came from me. He said, the farmer that owns all of the land behind this prison, he said, he woke up this morning and he found 2 of his cows clean sliced down the middle, just mutilated. He said, just a precision slice right down the middle. He goes, 2 completely separate halves. And on top of that, he was missing 2, 3, 4, I forget the number of goats. He had a bunch of livestock, but he was missing a number of goats. And he found the carcasses of the goats on the other side of his property in the woods. And when I say other side of property, I'm not talking about you're walking from one side of your backyard to the other. I'm talking about you're having to get in a side-by-side and you have to take a 5-10 minute ride, 2.5 miles to the other side of the property. And they could not figure out how the goats got out of the pen because he had an actual enclosure for the goats. And something had gotten in there and taken the goats out and then mutilated them and just left them in the woods. So we were on lockdown because the county could not figure out what happened. I don't know if they thought that an inmate had got out and just went haywire on some cows or what. I don't know. But they put us on lockdown. Well, I think it was that night or the following night, I'm laying back in my bunk. I'm reading a Michael Connelly novel. I'm reading one of his Harry Bosch books, which are great. I love them. And my buddy Montana, he comes up. He goes, hey, come over to the door and listen to this. I'm like, man, it's like 1:30 in the morning. I was like, what do you want me to come listen to? He goes, just come listen. So I jump down off of my bunk, and I walk over to the door that goes to the rec yard, the small yard, the one that is for each dorm. And I'm standing there for, I don't know, 30 seconds, 45 seconds. And I'm like, what am I supposed to be listening for? I don't hear anything. He goes, just listen. And I heard a scream that I had not heard in years. And it was that growl, howl, just demonic sound that I knew immediately what it was when I heard it. And I looked at my buddy Montana and I was like, I know exactly what that is. And he just sort of looked at me all cocky and he goes, oh, really? He goes, do you? He goes, well, please do tell. What is it? I was like, that, my friend, is a Dogman. And he gave me this look and he goes, what in the world is a Dogman? And I told him the story about that night on the trail. And he was like, dude, he goes, no. He goes, you saw a bear. I was like, no, it was not a bear. It was not a bear. I was like, people tried to tell me that for years. I was like, it's not a bear, my man. He goes, no, you saw a bear. He goes, whatever. He goes, it's probably just a coyote. I was like, okay, yeah, think whatever. It's a dog, man, but I'll see you in the morning, whatever. Well, the next day, it rained that night, so the small yard was opened up. We were off lockdown. The small yard was opened up, and it was a lot cooler. So I decided that I was actually going to go out there and sit in the chairs and, finish off my book outside. So there were 120 people that were in the dorm. And there were maybe 30, 35, 40 at the most of us out there on the small yard. Some people were working out. Some people were just kicking back on the chairs reading. Some people were out there playing basketball, just doing whatever. Well, one of the guys, we called him Old School. He points. He goes, what is that? He goes, look at that. And I sort of look up from my book, and I look where he's pointing. He's pointing out into the field. And maybe 1,000, 1,500 feet, I just saw the top of a head over the corn. And I saw the ears. And as soon as I saw the ears, I put my book down. My buddy Montana was out there. I was like, Montana, I was like, come here. He did the little one finger come on thing. He goes, what? And I was like, look out into that field. And I was like, tell me what you see. He goes, I see ears. I was like, yeah. I was like, just wait. And I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. And I was like, but just wait. Well, this thing stood up. And the first one I saw was maybe, 7.5, 8 feet. This thing was a monster. It was at a minimum 11 feet. It may have been bigger, but it was at least 11 feet. And the thing, again, that drew my attention was its coat. This is mid-morning, early afternoon in the Georgia summer sunshine, and it looked like that you had dipped this thing in a tub of Vanta Black, the blackest substance on earth, because it just absorbed all of the light. Nothing reflected off of it. It did not look shiny at all. It just looked like flat black. And I'm out there with people that are affiliated gang members, people that are assassins for those gangs. One of the people that was on the yard that day was an assassin for a gang who I'm not going to mention names of gangs, but he was an assassin, and he was in prison with life without parole for 6 murders. And he would always make the comment, he goes, well, that's only the ones that they know about, indicating that he had a lot more under his belt than just the 6 he got arrested for. He went white as a ghost. And I have never seen this man scared. This man is 6'5", 300 pounds of pure muscle, tattooed from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. He was, like the definition of the dorm alpha male. You didn't mess with him. No one messed with him. But this man tucked his tail and he went sprinting back inside, whimpering. So it stands up and it doesn't really look over at us. It's looking away. But I don't know if it didn't acknowledge us. I'm sure it knew that we were there, but it didn't feel a need to let us know that it knew that we were there, if that makes sense. That's a word spaghetti, but that's the easiest way I know how to describe it. So we go back in, and there was a guy, he had been in prison for like 30 to 35 years. We called him Old School. And he's stomping around the dorm, and he was like, it's a prophecy. He goes, it's the prophecy. Someone's like, Old School. They're like, man, what in the world are you hollering about? He goes, we just witnessed a demon. And everyone's like, a demon? And they're like, yeah. And I'm just sitting back not saying anything, just with my arms crossed, like, if y'all want to know what it is, all y'all got to do is come talk to this boy right here. I know what it is. Y'all can figure it out amongst yourselves, but I know. That was a demon. And prison is such a melting pot of people because people from all walks of life get locked up for whatever reason. So I was in there with people that they had been homeless their whole life, people that had owned multi-million-dollar companies, people that they just had petty theft charges, petty drug charges, people that had, multiple counts of murder, people from all different religions, Christians, Muslims, Wiccans, people that were agnostic, people that were atheists, people that were Buddhist, Hindu, everyone was in prison. So it was interesting to see people of different ethnical and religious backgrounds try to relate what they saw out there to their personal ethnical and religious beliefs. The Christians were saying it was a demon. The Muslims were quoting something from the Quran that I can't remember what it was. The Buddhists were saying it was one of their gods. The Hindus were saying pretty much the same. And the Wiccans, they were saying that it was something that the solar system or something had manifested, or I'm not really sure what Wiccans believe, but I know it's something with spirituality and solar manifestation or something. So they were saying that it was something sent by the cosmos to Earth. So I'm like, no, y'all are all wrong. It's just a Dogman. But again, I should put a sign on myself that says, Dogman expert, please ask questions. But didn't think to at the time. Well, a couple of days go by. Actually, more than a couple of days. It was weeks went by. And we're back out, and when I say weeks, I'm talking about maybe a month and a half, 2 months later. So it was a good time after. We're back out on the yard, in the small yard, and it was getting to be nighttime. It was, wasn't getting dark, but it was getting to the part where the sun, sun's starting to dip below the horizon, and things are starting to get dark quick. Well, they have something called the P truck, and P stands for perimeter. And the only job of the P truck is to drive around the perimeter of the prison all day and all night. And they're the only people in prison that are actually armed. The officers I work with inside the facility, they don't even have tasers. They have cans of pepper spray, but they don't have anything beyond that. The P truck, if you are an officer that works the P truck, you have a Glock 45. You have a Remington 12 gauge with buckshot, and you have an AR-15. Those are the three weapons that you have not on your person. The Glock's on your person, but the other two are just in the truck. Well, the P truck goes by, and it goes beyond where we can see, like around the corner, beyond where we can see, and we hear the tires screech, and we look up, and this truck is flying in reverse. I mean, flying. And the dude, he gets out, and he's got the 12 gauge in his hand. And he looks over at us, and he goes, y'all get back in your dorms. He goes, get back in your dorms now. And we didn't know what was going on. We just know that there's a correction officer with a 12 gauge in his hand, acting like he just saw the Virgin Mary appear in front of him. So we don't really question anything. We go back inside. We're not going to argue with the man that has the gun, was our thinking. Do not argue with the man that has the gun. So we go back inside. We get in there, and I mean, not even a minute later, officers are swarming the building. We're on lockdown. We're on lockdown. We're on lockdown. We're like, what in the world? And then the power goes out. We're like, what is going on? We're like, okay, what's going on? We could not figure out for days what was going on. And then finally, that same officer, the one that told us about the cow mutilations, he came back, and he was working night shift, and we were like, man, Barnes, that was his name, Officer Barnes. We were like, Barnes, what is going on? He goes, dude was doing the P truck rounds. He goes, and he claims that this giant creature jumped over the fence and landed in front of his truck. I was like, imagine that, really? I was like, well, how would you describe the creature? And he was like, he described it as a werewolf. And I was like, okay, about 11 feet tall. And he goes, yeah, how'd you know? I was like, we saw it out there in the field like a month and a half, 2 months ago, and told him what happened. The reason that the power went out is the furthest perimeter fence is an electric fence. And the way it's electrified is you've got the chain link fence with the razor wire on top, and then you have strips of electric band that run like a ladder up and down the fence all the way around. Now, these fences, they are designed not to just stop you, they are designed to drop you dead. In fact, while I was incarcerated, there was a lawsuit that came about with someone who tried to escape, and he grabbed the fence, not knowing that it was electric, and it stopped his heart and it killed him. And they were trying to determine whether it was the actual voltage that killed him, whether it was cranked up too high, or if it was because he had a underlying heart condition and the electricity just set it off and dropped him. But these things, they are designed to not only make you hesitate, they are designed to fry you. Okay, they are serious. This thing sliced through the wires of the electric fence, causing the whole prison compound to short out and blow pretty much every fuse they had. We finally got generator backup power going, but it sliced through the electric fence, the wires of it, and it didn't even phase it. Barnes told me that he saw where the mark or the slice was, and he goes, yeah, he goes, those things, he goes, they're serious. He goes, they are heavy duty hardware. He goes, it's not just wire. He goes, it is steel rod that is actually electrified from within. He goes, it's something that if you wanted to cut through yourself, after you turn it off, obviously, you would have to take, a very, very specialized cutoff wheel or sawzall and go through it. He goes, you can't just cut through something like that. He goes, someone went out there with some serious machinery and cut through this. And I was like, it wasn't a someone, it was a something. Well, that got the prison going because people had kind of forgotten about that day out on the small yard where we saw it out in the cornfield. But after this happened with it jumping in front of the P truck and getting through the fence and all sorts of stuff, we started hearing the howls in the prisons at night. And prisons, they are built to be strong, but they are not built to be comfortable. So they are built cheap. They can withstand a hurricane. And I know this because where I was got hit by Hurricane Helena. In fact, we were the last area in Georgia it hit before it completely wiped Asheville off the face of the earth. And it hit us hard, and it's still standing. They are designed to take the worst that Mother Nature can throw at them, but they are built very cheaply. If that, that's kind of oxymoronic, or that's kind of an oxymoron, but it's the truth. The walls are very thin. They are corrugated metal, thick corrugated metal, but they're corrugated metal nonetheless. And there's no insulation. By the grace of God, the second prison I was at had air conditioning and heat. Most prisons in the state of Georgia have no air conditioning and no heat. They are sweat boxes. But you can hear everything that is going on outside. We were not too far from an Air Force base, and we could hear airplanes, jets and helicopters all day, all night. Trains off in the distance, we could hear them like they were right next to the prison. You hear everything. And we just kept hearing those howls throughout the whole night. In the days and weeks following this, it just went on for probably a month. From the first time something happened to the last time, it was probably a 3-month time span. And finally, people were like, okay, we want to know what this is. The inmates were. And one of the guys in my cut, he had a phone. And he was out there that day. And I was like, look, you want to know what this is? He goes, yes. He goes, what is this? I was like, go on your phone. I was like, go on YouTube. So he did. I was like, pull up this dude named Dogman Encounters. And he looked at me. He goes, Dogman Encounters? He goes, what kind of stuff is that? And I was like, just do it. I was like, go on there. I was like, listen to some of his stuff and tell me that's not what we saw. So he goes on there and he listens to, I don't know how many, ones he listened to, but he listened to a few. And he comes back and he goes, you ain't kidding. He goes, that describes to a T, what you saw or what we saw. And then I told him, I was like, okay. I was like, well, go on there and look up episode 250. And he goes, why? I was like, that's my episode. And he goes, you were on this show? I was like, I had an encounter years ago. I was like, my Jeep was attacked by one of these things. He goes, no. He goes, you lying. I was like, I'm not lying. I was like, go to episode 250 and tell me you don't recognize that voice. So he went on episode 250 and he listened to it and he goes, you ain't kidding. So he started telling people that, hey, that white boy there, Ryan, he knows about this thing. So people started coming up to me and asking all kinds of questions. And when I say people, I'm talking about people that normally would not even speak to me because I'm an unaffiliated, I'm unaffiliated. I'm not a gang member. They only speak to their own gang. They don't talk to anyone else, but they're coming up to me like, hey, let me holler at you. Let me get in your ear. I need to know what this was that I saw. And I was able to educate a lot of them on what it was. And, the ones that had phones, I would be like, you've got a phone, go to Dogman Encounters on YouTube. So you have a whole audience in prison you don't even know about. But I was able to educate a lot of them about what it was. And I made them realize that, this whole kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species thing that you learn in, ninth grade biology. I'm like, yeah, it's great, but it's only the tip of the iceberg. I was like, there are things out there beyond the realm of what you can even imagine that exists. And I was like, we're talking about Bigfoot, we're talking about Dogman, we're talking about skinwalkers, we're talking about Mothman, we're talking about the Loch Ness Monster, we're talking about all these different type of cryptids that are out there that you think they're nothing more than folklore. I was like, you think they're nothing more than entertainment on the History Channel. I was like, but let me ask you this. They had to get their start somewhere. All these people, they didn't just sit around a table one day in a production studio and say, you know what? We're going to make a show about trying to find Bigfoot, or we're going to make a show about a ranch out in Utah that has skinwalker problem. Yeah, people will definitely watch that. Well, they had to get that from somewhere, and production companies, they're not going to waste the time and effort to try to build a show around something that doesn't have plausible results. They're not going to spend all the production budget to do that because no one would watch it. You don't watch a show that doesn't have a tangibility of reality. That's what makes those shows so interesting, is the reality of it. People are seeing this evidence be presented before them on a television, and they're like, oh, wow, this stuff actually could be real. It came from somewhere. All of this folklore, all of these wives' tales, they had to have an origin point. People from all these different areas of the world didn't just one day decide that, hey, we want to make up this story. No, they had to start from somewhere, and I got a lot of them to realize that. And a lot of these, not to be disrespectful to them, but they are very closed-minded individuals. They only think about one thing only, and that is surviving prison, because a lot of them, they were never going to leave. That was their home. So they only had to focus on survival. But the fact that I was able to actually get through to them and show them that, hey, there is all this stuff out there. Sorry you're never going to see it, but hey, it's out there. It blew their minds. I mean, it was really cool to actually be able to educate them. And they're like, so you're not freaking out over this thing? And I was like, not really. They're like, well, what if it tries to get in? And I was like, I don't think it's going to. And I was like, by the time this thing tries to get in, you're going to have a P officer in a P truck coming out with a shotgun trying to blast at it. And I was like, now it ain't going to kill it. It's going to, tick it off. I was like, but it'll probably drive it away. I was like, it's not going to break in. It's not going to be able to get into us. We're like a Walmart grocery store for it, probably. But he was like, a lot of them, they were just mind blown that these things existed. And they would have never believed it unless they were out there that day and saw it. But that is my in-prison Dogman encounter story.
That's one heck of an experience. Did the prison ever change policies now that they knew that the Dogman was out there?
Not that I am aware of. They didn't really have a lot of policies to begin with. Georgia prisons are kind of a free-for-all. You can do really pretty much anything you want. So there's really no policy. There's no structure. And I don't think they implemented anything more, because one day the officer comes in, Barnes, he just comes in and says, yeah, that problem with this werewolf thing, he goes, it's taken care of. And we were like, what do you mean it's taken care of? He goes, oh, no, it's taken care of. And we were like, well, can we get like some specifics on this? Like, okay, that's a very broad net, taken care of. That can encompass a bunch of stuff. But, after that, we never heard it or saw it ever again. There was never any problems.
Really makes you wonder what was behind that. If the government might have come in and done something to rid the area of it, or what happened.
Well, what's even more interesting is I tried to look up cattle mutilations for Jenkins County in that time frame, and I could find nothing. There was no information at all about any missing goats or cattle mutilations or anything, which in a farming town, that's a big deal. If cows are getting mutilated, people want to know about that, but I could find nothing about it. It was like it had been swept under the rug and wiped away.
Oh, I'm sure they did keep that hush hush.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
of course. That's not the kind of thing that they want to get out and have people talking about. But when things like that start happening, especially in a small town like that, people do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's inevitable.
Oh, yeah.
Did the prisoners change their behaviors after the word got out about that 11-footer being around?
Not really. You have to think that you have to put on a certain persona in prison, which I never did. I was the same person in prison as I am outside of prison because I'm like, I have no reason to change. If you don't like me, you don't like me. I can't help that. But so many people, they put on this tough guy act because they think that if they do that, no one's going to mess with them. So even if they were worried about it, or even if they were scared, they would never let you know because in their minds, if they show that, oh, you're scared of something that's beyond the fence out in the field, oh, you're a wuss, you're whatever. And they feel like that would make them look vulnerable to rival gang members or whoever. And that's the last thing that people like that want in prison.
Prisoners do some dumb things. I can understand them doing that to try and protect how people see them and view them, but yeah, when it comes to that, it would show common sense to be very wary of being outside. I mean, it already showed that it jumped over that fence right in front of the P truck. It could always come over the other fence or come through the other fences and just get into
Yep.
the yard.
Yep. But again, you have to consider the source. You've got, I used to say that, well, if you had common sense, you wouldn't be in prison. Then I realized how easy it is to get in prison. But, a lot of people, they're not there for being intelligent, as hard as that is for me to say, because I met a lot of good, stupid people in prison. But they aren't there for thinking rationally. So they were thinking more about their machoism than anything else. But I guarantee you, if they were out there and one of those things started jumping over the fence, they would be the first people running inside.
Yeah, they probably would be. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Having as much experience with these guys as you have, granted, it's not a ton of experience, but you saw how big that one was when you had your first encounter, and then
Yes.
you're laying eyes on an 11 plus footer. Did you start doing equations about how easily that dog man could actually break into the prison if it wanted to?
So the prison building itself, I'm not sure how easily you would be able to get into just because of the way it's built, but over the fence into the perimeter, oh, absolutely. The fence itself was probably 12, 13 feet high, maybe a little bit less, but about 12, 13 feet high. And I mean, I know without a doubt that an 11 footer would have a vertical jump of probably 20 feet, maybe. I mean, it would be able to leap over that, like an Olympic gold medalist. It would have no problem. Um, but it also makes me wonder because it's huge. That's not only the second one I've ever seen, but it's the biggest one I've ever seen. It makes me wonder if the one that I saw on the trail that night, if it was a younger, if not a full grown, if it was like a child or something, because this one was way shorter than the other one.
Yeah, might have been. Height is a pretty good indicator of their age and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, you might be onto something there. You
Yep.
just might. Why do you think that dog man hung around that prison for such a long time? 3 months? That's a long period of time.
I think what it was is because the dude that owns the property that the prison is on had all that farmland and he had woodland. There was creeks, there was all kinds of stuff, but there were the farm animals, the livestock. He had goats, he had chickens, he had cows, he had pigs, he had everything. I think what it was is the dog man knew that there was a very, very easily accessible source of food right there for him.
I see all the livestock.
Yeah, all the livestock. If I had to guess, that would be my guess.
Yeah, well, listening to you describe how that area was, it sounds like it could find livestock like that pretty much anywhere it went. So, in my
Yeah.
opinion, it's still strange that it hung around in such close proximity to that prison.
Yeah, and that's something that I have thought about myself, and it's something that we may never know. The one thing that I've learned from listening to your podcast over the years and all that is the behavior of one dog man might be completely different from the behavior of another one. We'll never understand why they do what they do. So it could have had a very good reason for one to stick around, or it could have just been that's where he decided that he wanted to make his turf.
Yeah, that's true. It's hard enough to think for people. I've said that plenty of times. There's
Oh
no
yeah,
way to think for these guys because,
exactly,
with a lot of things, it seems like there's no rhyme nor reason.
exactly.
Definitely does. I know with your first encounter, you took that in stride. It seemed like you took it in stride. With this second encounter already being under all that stress, all that duress, was the second one still easier to deal with than the first?
It really was. And the reason, it may or may not surprise y'all, there is not a lot to do in prison. You either read, play cards, play dominoes, sleep, or watch TV. That's all there is to do. Or if the rec yard's open, you can go out there. But you can only do that so many times before it gets redundant and it gets really boring. So it was almost like a breath of fresh air to have something different happening, despite the fact that it was a Dogman encounter, multiple Dogman encounters. It was nice to have something different going on to break up the monotony, because it broke up the monotony for 2.5, 3 months. It was like a circus. But I took it in stride because, I mean, we never know what these things' intentions are. But the one time that I did see it, it did not come across in a menacing way. Now, that doesn't really mean anything with these creatures, but it never once looked over to where we were. So I don't know if it was just perusing the field looking for something to do, or if it was just letting one of us to know that, hey, I'm here. I was never really concerned for our safety because of the way the building is built. I was just concerned for what the prison was going to do as far as dealing with us, because we didn't want to be on lockdown. That was my really only concern, honestly.
Wow, that's one heck of a way to get off of lockdown. I don't want to put words in your mouth, Ryan, but from listening to you flesh out what I just asked you about, it almost sounds to me like you look at that Dogman being around as being a good thing to break up the monotony. Did I hear you right about that?
Well, the monotony was probably the only good part of it being around. That was the only enjoyable part of it. Because people, they were, like I said, they were freaking out, and the prison, they didn't know what to do. They were completely mind blown. I would love to have been a fly on the wall in their front offices where they were trying to figure out what this thing was and what they need to do. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall. But the monotony being broken up was definitely a blessing, because it gives you something to take your mind off of the fact that you are in prison, something to sort of get your wheels turning. But that's the only upside, was the fact that we had a distraction. Everything else was a downside.
Yeah, I can understand why. And just for clarity, you did realize that Dogman could have broken into the prison, into the cell house, and gotten to you if it wanted to do so, correct?
I mean, that always was in the back of my mind. I just, part of me feels like in the time it would have taken for it to get in there, someone would have started shooting at it, with the P truck. But then again, I've heard stories about these things taking buckshot to the chest at point blank and not phasing it. So that was always in the back of my mind, but I wasn't too concerned about it. Why? I don't know. I guess it was just another one of those things, oh, that won't happen to us type of things. But maybe I was just trying to get myself to believe that. I mean, I don't know. But no, that was definitely in the back of my mind the whole time.
Well, whatever it takes to help you get by, you should do. So
Right.
can't fault you for that at all. This might seem like a silly question, but did you have any problem sleeping knowing that thing was around?
I mean, I didn't sleep good in prison to begin with. There's always noise. It's never quiet. So sleep in prison is a very off and on thing to begin with. There definitely were nights that I laid there and I was trying to wrap my head around the fact that I had actually encountered one of these things again, because I never thought I would ever see another one. I never thought that I would ever see another one of these things anywhere. And then all of a sudden, here one is. And then also, there were nights I was laying in bed where it just sort of like hit me that, well, that's just confirmation. Not that I ever questioned what I saw the first time, but that just confirms to me that it's not just up in North Georgia. These things are everywhere. But it definitely kept me up, beyond my normal business hours, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, I'd say that was definitely the case. Let's get to some of the listeners' questions now.
All
People in the
right.
live chat. The first one up is from Baby Girl, and she wants to know what color were the eyes of the first Dogman you saw?
Okay, so everything was lit up red because it was nighttime. It was at this point it was like 3 in the morning, and I had my brake lights on, and like my headlights, my brake lights were LED, so they were super bright. Everything was washed out red, so I really couldn't tell what color the eyes were because everything was lit up red. So I wouldn't be able to say, with confidence what the color was because, like I said, everything was washed out.
Uh-oh, we lost you. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, now
Hello?
I can. Yeah, for
Oh,
the
okay.
last half of that sentence you cut out. Can you please re-say that?
Yeah, no. Like I said, the headlight or the tail lights were LED, aftermarket LED, just like the headlights were, and my brakes were on, so everything was lit up red. Everything. Um, so everything was just washed out in red. So I really could not say with absolute confidence what color the eyes were because the only thing that I was seeing was how bright the red LED was lighting everything up. So I really couldn't deduce color because of the red washout.
And like I've said, eyewitnesses several times before, if you have an experience like that, the last thing you're going to think about is the minutia of the details. You're just thinking
Yeah.
about getting out of there. You've never experienced anything of the sort before. So yeah, that can't be held against you. I definitely don't fault you for not knowing that. I get it. I do. This next question, Ryan, is from Andre Soares. And Andre wants to know, I'm sorry, Soares. Andre wants to know, what do you think the Dogman wanted, or why did it appear in that setting? I mean, prison. I think you already answered that when you mentioned the
Yeah,
livestock
and I
ranch.
mean, yeah, and that's just a theory. I mean, it's really hard to say, what it wanted. The previous experience up on that trail, I think in retrospect, I think that one's pretty easy to explain. Urination is marking your territory in nature, and me and my friend who got out to urinate on the trail, it viewed us as challenging its territory. We were marking on its territory, but this one. I mean, I really couldn't say. I mean, it could be any number of things.
Yeah, well, I guess we're never going to know. All we can do is guess about that, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately. Bad Pup wants to know, why would the Dogman want to cut through the fence and want inside?
Again, that's one of those things that, it could be any number of things. It could be it was just trying to, sharpen its claws on something, maybe, or it was trying to climb up and it just sliced through it, or, you know, I don't know what, because that happened after it jumped in front of the P truck and the P truck peeled away. Now, the dude that had the shotgun, he never fired anything off. He never shot at this thing, but he did something that made it jump back over the fence, apparently. But it was after it jumped back over the fence when it happened. So my best theory would be maybe in jumping back over the fence, one of its claws grabbed hold of it on the way down and broke it. But that's just speculation.
Yeah, well, like we talked about earlier, we can't think for these things. All we can do is guess. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we're never going to ever know about that for sure. PW Harris has the next question. They want to know, Ryan, why do you think the Dogman was so vocal during that time instead of just killing animals in silence?
I think that at that point, it realized that we knew that it was out there. And truthfully, I think it was just toying with us. Yeah, it's kind of like an air raid siren going off by accident, or someone, purposely turning an air raid siren on. Nothing is going on at that moment, but it sends chills down your spine and makes you think, like, man, what if this actually was happening? I think it was something like that, where he was signaling his siren, and he just wanted to let us know that, hey, y'all, where y'all are, this is my turf. These animals I'm killing, it could be you. Because, like I said, it wasn't until after the time where he jumped back over the fence that we started hearing all these howls. I mean, it was after we had no doubt, or it had no doubt that we knew it knew that it started doing that.
It made its presence known.
Yep.
Yeah, I see. This next one up is from Ben YouTubing, and Ben wants to know how often does he think of his encounters?
So, I mean, it's something that comes up every now and then. It's not something that's on my mind all the time. Um, but, if I ever talk to my friend Colin or ever talk to Walker, um, we'll make a joke like, hey, how about that dog man? But, it's not something that I think about all the time, but it does pop into my head more frequently, especially the second time around, than it used to before. Because, I used to live up in northern Georgia. After I got out of prison, I relocated out of the county that I got my conviction from because I just didn't want to be up there anymore.
Oh no, you cut out again. Are you there?
Oh, yeah. Am I here? Can you hear me?
I can now. You cut out right after you said you didn't want to be up in northern Georgia.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I used to live in northern Georgia. Um, and the county that I got my conviction in, I just didn't want to be up there anymore because of the way they treated me. So I actually live in the city of Atlanta now. I am downtown. I am inside perimeter. And I'm more conscious of the fact that, you know, there could be these things in the woods around the house that I have. There could be things in, you know, the park, the botanical gardens in downtown Atlanta. There could be these things everywhere. I'm a lot more conscientious of that now that I've seen them in two totally different areas of the state.
Yeah, that'll tend to happen once you have encounters in two different places like that. So
Yeah.
that's understandable. The next one up is from Baby Girl, and she wants to know, did those howls sound really deep?
So it was kind of like a crescendo almost. It was started off with like a growl, and then it would go into a deeper kind of howl, but it was a little bit more high pitched. But the growl itself, I mean, it was pretty deep. It depends on what you're comparing it to, also. But if I had to describe it, it would be a deeper growl that cascades into like a higher pitched sort of yip or howl or whatever, but it definitely had a demonic sound to it.
Well, that's a good way to describe it. And the next question for you is from Brenton Stone. And Bryn wants to know, did the prison officers change their behavior or say anything about the encounters?
So the officers that worked the prison, they did not change behaviors, at least on the surface. But then again, that was protocol. They did not want us to know when anything was going on because they viewed us knowing, they viewed that as a safety concern. Because if we knew something was going on in another prison, they didn't want the same thing happening at the prison that I was at. The only officer we could ever actually get to talk to us about it, I forgot his name again, I'm terrible with names, was the one that I mentioned earlier. He was the only one that would even give us any kind of semblance of information about what was going on with whatever it was that was happening around. But on the surface, change of protocol was something that we visibly never saw.
Yeah, it's really surprising that that guard would tell you anything at all because I'm sure they were told, they were instructed to keep everybody in the dark. And for
Yeah, he
obvious
he was
reasons.
not supposed to, but I mean, even the guards don't follow rules a lot of times.
Oh, sure. Yeah. A lot of the time, the guards are the ones bringing the contraband into the prison.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, that's how it works normally. Or I should say sometimes. This next one up is from DJ Chris Mack, and DJ wants to know, or Chris, I should say, wants to know, Ryan, thanks for sharing your experience again. Did the dog man look older than the one in your first encounter since it was much bigger?
As far as like visible age, it was far enough away that it was really hard to tell. Based off of the height, though, I would assume that it was older than the first one. But as far as like fine details, I didn't get to see it as up close as I did with the other one in my rear window. But just based off of the height, I would say that it was probably older by whatever degree than the first one.
Well, it goes without saying, I'm so glad it wasn't closer than it was.
Yes.
Yeah, that wouldn't have been a good thing. The next one up is from Bang Bang, and she wants to know, Ryan, do you think it was randomly there or just hunting humans?
I don't know if it was randomly there. I don't think it was hunting humans because around the prison, um, if you go on Google Maps and look up Jenkins Correctional Facility in Millen, Georgia, you'll see on the map Kent Farm Road. That's the name of the dude that owns the farm and all the land. Is his last name's Kent. But beyond the tree lines, you can see a whole bunch of trailer parks. And we never heard of anyone in the trailer parks having any kind of issues. It was only the livestock. Now, that doesn't mean that it wasn't, bloodthirsty for humans. It very well could have been. But I feel like if that was the case, it probably would have gone into the trailer parks around and wreaked some kind of havoc. And that is something that we definitely would have heard about. I mean, without a shadow of a doubt, we would have heard about that.
You're right, you definitely would have. If the authorities could really keep it under wraps, that's one thing, but when it's happening out in the open like that, yeah, there's no way to squash everyone, keep
Exactly.
everyone from talking about it. You're right. The next one up is from Andre Soares, and Andre wants to know, do you believe prisons are hotspots for paranormal activity due to the intense energy there?
Oh, 100%. In the state of Georgia, you have to go through what they call diagnostics before you go to your permanent camp. And diagnostics it's called Georgia Diagnostics and Classification State Prison now, but it's Jackson State Penitentiary. It's actually where they have death row. But it is the oldest prison in the state of Georgia. It was built in the 1950s. And there have been so many deaths and so many murders and so many executions there. In fact, one night I'm laying in my cell, and the door to my cell, you could see out into the main hallway for the prison, the corridor where all the dorms were. And I'm laying there, and my bunkmate, he goes, Bunky, he goes, what in the world is that? He goes, there ain't no women in this prison. I was like, well, there's women guards. He goes, no. He goes, look. And we saw a lady in white walking up the corridor to the prison. And she walked by the main door that our by the main Sally port, the door that came into our dorm. She walked by it, but as she was walking by it, she was like fading away, like she was getting lighter. But yeah, they're absolutely a hot spot for paranormal activity. I mean, if we're talking about ghosts and stuff, not cryptids, I saw and encountered so many paranormal things when I was in prison. It's not even funny.
Wow. It's bad enough having an experience like that, but when you're locked up in a cell and can't get away, that makes it
Oh
even
yeah.
worse. Yeah, it really does. No More Funland wants to know, it's got a question that's related to that. After the Dogman showed up around the prison, did any inmates share paranormal stories with you that you could share?
Believe it or not, that was something that before the Dogman happened, we like to talk about. A very popular TV show, or two very popular TV shows in prison is Ancient Aliens, and Zach Bagans' show Ghost Adventures. Those are two really popular shows in prison. And, a lot of times we would sit there and watch them on the nights they would premiere. I can't remember what nights it was they premiered, but we would sit there and watch them, and then we would, share paranormal stories. And, you had people that had stories, like what the people at my old job had, where, oh, well, the door used to open to my bedroom, or we would hear whispers in the night. But I mean, there were other stories about people that, watched deceased relatives, walk through their front door, years after they had passed away, had been, exploring abandoned buildings or something and came around the corner and there's an apparition standing there. People have all kinds of different paranormal experiences, both inside prison and outside of prison.
Yeah, if we only knew. I can only imagine the extent. This next one up is from Big Bird, and they want to know, what makes you definitely say it was a dog man and not something else?
I cannot think of anything else that would fit the exact same description as the last one that I saw. I mean, it is to a T the description of a dog man. The height, the coat. We could not see the lower half of it because it was in the field and there was the crop. But, from the upper chest that I saw, it had a very bulky chest, like Hulk Hogan, bodybuilder chest. I didn't see any hair. I mean, I'm sure there was hair on the chest, very faint, but it looked like a human chest. We could not see the bottom of the hands because the arms were so long, but the definitive defining factor was the snout and the ears. the ears, they were pointed like they were military daggers, and the snout was like a Doberman's. I'm not. I said this last time, but I'm terrible with identifying dogs. I think it's the Dobermans that have the really long, thin snout, but it was like that, but just bulked up. I mean, I know without a doubt that it was a Dogman. That's the only thing it could have been.
Well, I agree. Yeah, that's a textbook description for one.
Yeah.
This next one up is from D Truth. Hey, D. His question is, I've worked in a prison and I doubt anything could get through a cell cage. What do you think?
I mean, it would take a lot to get through a cell cage. In Georgia, we don't actually have cages. It is cinder block, and then you have a solid steel door that has a window. The window does have a cage on the outside of it, but it is actually a solid steel door that's got an electric lock that opens and closes. Now you can modify the locks. You can break the locks, and you can open and close the door yourself. But I mean, I don't say that it would be impossible for something to get in, but it would take whatever it was very, very long to get in. It would not be a in and out type of thing. You would have to work at it.
Don't be so sure about that when you think about some
Yeah.
of the feats I've heard these guys do, especially an 11-footer. I mean, they've accomplished some ridiculous feats. You've
That is
seen
very
those.
true. Yes.
Oh, sure. You've seen those huge fifth wheel trailers, the ones that are 40, some are even 50, 53 feet long. I've heard
Yeah.
about big dogmen like that, pushing on the side and pushing it up onto two wheels and ripping stuff out. I mean, just ripping down trees, big trees. Well, not huge
Yeah.
ones, but ones that are way too big to be able to pull down, you would think at least. But yeah, I've heard about them doing ridiculous feats. So I wouldn't
Yeah.
be so
That is
sure
a
about
valid
that.
point. That is a valid point. So it might have an easier time than we think.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it would. The next one up is from Baby Girl, and she wants to know, have you ever listened to the werewolf howl in the movie An American Werewolf in London?
Believe it or not, I have never actually seen any of those movies. I used to work so much that I never really had time to watch movies. But I've never actually seen that movie, but I would have to look it up on YouTube and compare it.
Wait a minute, from listening to you say that, if you normally don't listen to those movies, does that mean you have never seen the movie Bad Moon?
I have not. No, actually.
Oh, man. There's a lot of work to be done here. A lot of work to be done. You've got to be kidding
You
me.
sound like a disappointed father right now. You're like, oh, son.
You haven't seen the best werewolf movie out there.
No, I don't watch a lot of movies, and it's just been that way my whole life. I've never had the patience to sit down and watch one unless it's been something like James Bond or Indiana Jones. So maybe I'm just weird.
No, not at all. I mean, that's just not your forte. You've
Yeah,
experienced the real thing. Well, not
exactly.
werewolves,
I
but
have,
dogmen.
yes.
Close
But I'm
enough.
always open to movie suggestions. I'm always open.
Well, it's always good to keep your mind open. But no, I don't fault you for that. No biggie at all. Andres Carrizales, his next question, he wants to know, when you're giving out info, did the others gather around like a class, and did guards ask you for information too?
So the guards, they were not actually in the dorm. The way the building is set up is you have 4 dorms, 3 to 4 dorms, but they've got like a glass wall that looks over into a main hub. And the officers, they actually sit at a desk out there, so they're not in the dorms. If they want to come in the dorm, they have to pop the door and walk in. Um, but yeah, there were a couple of times where they would be like, man, come sit down with us and you tell us about this thing. But it was never a huge group. I think the most people at one time was 4 people that I was sitting down with, drinking coffee and telling them about my experience and what it was and sort of what I've learned about how they act. Or I mean, you really never can learn how they act because they're so you can never predict what they're going to do. So there really is no rhyme or reason to learning how they act. But just explaining them the best I could in terms that they could understand what it was. But it was never like a classes in session type of thing. But there were definitely times where I talked to multiple people at once about it.
Well, yeah, you were the go-to guy, and for good reason. So I'm sure they did. This next one up is from Bang Bang, and she wants to know, Ryan, do you think antler rubbings on trees could really be from dogman claws?
I mean, there's definitely a possibility that they possibly could be. I feel like that if they were from Dogman claws, I feel like they would be a lot more defined than a lot of antler rubbings. Because a lot of antler rubbings that I've seen, um, they're shallow, but like the bark is gone, and you've got some actual meat from the tree gone, but they're sort of rounded off and they're shallow and all that. I feel like if it was Dogman claws, it would be just a straight gash or a chunk out of the tree. But I mean, there's always a possibility. I mean, yeah, I would definitely not doubt it.
Yeah, that's how it normally is. Pretty deep gouges. Not
Yep.
just in a tree like a beech either. I mean, trees with pretty formidable bark.
Yeah.
Shagbark, hickory, yeah, even oak. You'll
Oh
notice
yeah.
pretty deep gouges, which will make you reel when you see them. This next one up is from Baby Girl, and she wants to know, do you still go out into the woods?
Yes, I do actually. In fact, I'm supposed to be going hiking with my brother tomorrow. But yes, I still do go out in the woods.
Oh, good. That's really
Yeah.
good. You said that you do go out and you're supposed to go out tomorrow, but are you compromised at all when you do?
I am much more aware. I don't want to say that it makes me nervous, or it makes me scared. It just makes me more aware of things that are around, and I am always looking for any indication that something other than a normal animal might be present. But so far, and then again, I've only been out for a month. I got out of prison literally last month. So far, I have not seen anything. But this will be my first outing into the woods tomorrow. So who knows? Maybe I'll end up back on your show in a week or so.
Well, I hope you don't.
Hopefully not, but
Yeah, that makes two of us hoping you don't. But if you do have another encounter, then yeah, I'll be here. Just let me
oh
know.
yeah. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. But if it does, I know where to come.
Yeah, I definitely hope it doesn't. And I saw a comment from Cody asking if I missed his question. Yeah, I sure did, Cody. If you could post it again, I'll put it right up to the top and ask it next. After this next question here. This one is from DJ Chris Mack from Chris. And Chris wants to know, I take it your friends haven't had any more encounters since, Ryan. You're lucky to have friends who saw the same thing that can support you. I guess it's more of a comment than a question, and he's got a good point.
Yeah. But yeah, no, they have, to my knowledge, and they would have told me, I'm sure. No, they have not had any encounters. Colin, the one that was from West Virginia, he actually lives down in Sarasota, Florida now. And then Walker, the one that was from Los Angeles, he actually has moved back to Los Angeles. But they have, to my knowledge, they have not had any other encounters.
Yeah, hopefully they haven't. And like you said, if they had, I'm sure they would have let you know. So it's pretty safe to say they haven't. That's not exactly a leap. It looks like Caitlin McLeod wants to know, I used to live in Atlanta. So do you think these things could be even in the suburbs of downtown Atlanta?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm in DeKalb. I'm in Decatur, and I would not be surprised if there was ones in the woods around here. I mean, I've seen firsthand that they can be anywhere. I mean, now given both of the places I saw them were sort of out of the way places, one way up in the mountains, the other one in a little farming town. But I mean, I've heard stories about these people, these things in downtown, small downtown areas. They're not scared of people. They're not scared of cars. They're not scared of anything. They know that they are the apex predator wherever they are. It would not surprise me if one walked through downtown Atlanta right now.
You're
I mean,
right.
they have no fear. They have nothing to fear.
You're right. You make some really good points. People talk about putting up lights and things like that to try to deter them, but these things have been seen standing under security lights at night for
Yeah.
apparently no particular reason. Yeah, lights aren't going to drive them off. And in a
No.
lot of cases, it was seen that game cams don't drive them off effectively.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they go where they want to go and they do what they want to do. And
Yep.
that's about all there is to it,
Oh yeah.
unfortunately. This next question up is from Caitlin McLeod again. She wants to know, do you think these things could be werewolves? Because it seems as if to me that dogmen would need woods and coverage. Werewolves wouldn't need that.
No, because if you go back into werewolf lore, werewolves are only supposed to be out on nights with full moons. And this thing I saw in the middle of the day. Um, and now, could that be where the werewolf lore came from? That's possible. But as far as werewolves in the traditional speak about someone transforming into a werewolf, I don't think that they could be werewolves. I would say that they are dogmen and that werewolf is a separate cryptid. But again, that's something that we may never know because we can never really get one of these specimens to study easily.
Yeah, it's not easy to get one to lay on a table for examination.
No,
You're right about that. And we don't even know that werewolves exist. I mean, that's really a stretch to say that they do, but it's possible. I mean, anything in this crazy world we live in is possible. So
oh yeah,
I'm not going to rule it out and say, nah, they definitely aren't out there because I'd be foolish to do that. But I will tell you that, gosh, it's really hard to believe that they are out there, that they do
yeah,
exist. Again, I'm going to qualify it again because we have tons of people saying Vic says that werewolves can't exist. Like I said, I'm never going to say that they can't be out there. I'm just saying it's hard to believe that they are.
yeah.
And here's the question from Cody that I missed. Cody Laughing Wolf. He wants to know, you said yours was the Skyrim type. Did you encounter more than one, male or female? I have Sasha, but she's tall and skinny.
So I've encountered two on two separate occasions, but each encounter it was just one single dog man. There wasn't multiple ones. As far as male or female, I don't have a clue. I really don't. It could have been all of the above.
Yeah, you didn't check it
No,
for.
I did not check it. Didn't stick around long enough to.
Yeah, you can't say I blame you there. The next one up is from Jen Copes, or Cops, I'm sorry. And her question is this prison near a quarry?
That's a good question. I'm actually not sure. I know that it's not far from a paper mill because in the mornings you could smell the sulfur from the paper mill. Um, but as far as it being near a quarry, I don't know if it's near a quarry or not. I'd have to look that up at some point, but I'm not sure.
I wonder why they wanted to know that. Yeah, just
Maybe possibly caves that lives in the quarry or something. Maybe I don't know. That's what I would guess.
yeah, that might be. Well, I can tell you this: if you have a quarry around, that definitely does increase the odds of having a Sasquatch in the area. So
Yes, yes, yes.
that's probably what they're getting at there, wondering if that
Oh yeah,
applies to
yeah, I
Dogman
got
too.
you. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look up what's in the area. I don't think there's a quarry down there. I know that there is Plant Vogel, a nuclear facility not far from there, but that's the only big industry that I know of other than the paper mill.
Huh. Well, you might have some around. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
This next one up is, I guess, a question for me. DJ Chris Mack wants to know a question for Vic, if that's okay, related to what Ryan said. Which breed/type of dogman, in other words, Doberman, Alsatian, hyena, or other, is the most common sighting? Well, I normally don't answer questions for me because I want the focus to be on the guest, but since we're winding down, I will answer this one, Chris. Wow, it just runs the gamut. There is no real pattern. I mean, I've had tons of encounters coming in describing all sorts of variants of canine types and variants of type threes. As far as the most common type, the one that Cody's describing tonight in both of his encounters, that's normally the most commonly reported one. And as far as the color goes, that Vanta black is the most common color. Eye color seems like amber is the most common for that. So hope that answered your question there. And then the next question for you, Ryan, is from Big Bird. And they want to know, I know I can find Bigfoot in the city. Has he gone looking for Dogman where he is now?
I have not gone looking for Dogman, and I don't intend to go looking for him either. If I ever have another encounter, it's not going to be because I was trying to find him. It's because I just happened to stumble across him. But I mean, like I said, I would not be surprised if there were ones that were, in Atlanta somewhere. Maybe not in downtown because there's not really anywhere for it to hide, but in the suburbs immediately outside of downtown, like Buckhead, Duluth, Milton, places like that where there's a lot of wooded area, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
It would really surprise you if you knew these guys, they come into major metropolitan areas. Yeah, normally you're not going to find them downtown, of course, for obvious
Yeah.
reasons, but they have been reported by very credible eyewitnesses being well within the city limits of major metropolitan areas:
Oh yeah.
Dallas, Cincinnati, Boston. The list just goes on and on and on. So
Yeah.
they go where they
Yeah.
want
Well,
to
this
go. And
this one was 45 minutes south of Augusta. That's the second biggest city in Georgia. So
yeah, that's a big one. That's not a cow town. This
no.
next one up is from Stuart Vandermeer, Merwa. And Stuart's question is, hey, Ryan, if you're going into the woods, I think he means if you're going into the woods, be sure to be vigilant and aware of your surroundings. This will help you when you're in the woods.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've always been my whole life. I've always been aware and vigilant. That's one thing that's been instilled into me. But ever since my first encounter, especially, but now that I've had the second one, like I said, this is my first venture into the woods in like 4 years. So I'm definitely gonna have my eyes peeled for anything that seems amiss. Sounds, smells, especially because I've never actually smelled one, but I've heard them described as being horrific smelling. So anything like that that could signal something is amiss, and I'll definitely be very vigilant as to what's around me.
And that's just common sense, though.
Oh yeah,
You're an intelligent guy, so you already know that. But then again, these guys, they do get a really bad rap. I'm never going to say there aren't dangerous ones out there. And I mean, a dogman might have gotten up on the wrong side of the log that morning. It
yeah,
might be dangerous, but yeah, these guys, they definitely are not wired to kill you as soon as the opportunity presents itself. If that was the case, I wouldn't have spoken with thousands upon thousands of dogman eyewitnesses who were caught dead to rights but allowed to leave without a scratch. If they
oh yeah,
were wired to be dangerous and actually harm you as soon as the opportunity presents itself, you wouldn't have nearly as many repeating cases of that being proven not to be the case.
yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a given there. That's been proven time and time again. This last question is going to be the last one of the night, and it's from Lisa Dugan. Lisa wants to know, people say that Bigfoot has the ability to cloak themselves. Do you think the dogmen can cloak?
I mean, possibly. Um, I know that skinwalkers they can take on all kinds of forms, but whether or not dogmen have the ability for something like that, it's we really don't know. We know the basics of them, but as far as the nitty gritty details, that's something we may never know. Is it possible? Entirely. But is it likely? I really couldn't say.
I'll tell you this, Lisa, I have spoken with tons of credible eyewitnesses, very credible eyewitnesses who've reported seeing that. So it seems like there is some there that they can cloak, or at least some of them can, however that works. So I hope that answers your question. But like Ryan said, unless we have them on a table and have full access to them for a long period of time, there's no way to find out what the extent of their abilities are. All we can do is guess on that. So that's all there is to that. Well, before we get out of here, Ryan, do you have any closing comments you'd like to put out there for us?
Uh, no, just for those that go out in the woods, like people like y'all have told me, be vigilant. These things are out there, and they do mean harm in a lot of instances. I wouldn't want anyone that's listening to be out in the woods and miss one of the signs and end up on the wrong side of one. And also, like I said before, protect y'all's identities. Do not end up in prison like I did. But other than that, it's been an absolute blast being back on the show. It's been great.
Well, it's been great having you back on. Full disclosure here, I hope you never do have to come back on, because that would mean you never have another encounter with one of these things. But
That's very
like,
true.
that's right. Like we've established before, though, if you do have another encounter and would like to come back on to tell us about it, then by all means, I'll be here. Please let me know.
I definitely will.
Good man. I appreciate it.
You're
Well,
welcome.
having Said all that, Ryan. Like I said, I really appreciate you coming back on to fill us in on what's been going on. And yeah, thanks so much for your time and have a great night.
You too.
I'll count on it. Thanks. We'll see ya.
We'll see you.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, that's it for another live stream. As always, thanks so much for listening to the show, everyone, and for supporting these eyewitnesses. I really appreciate it. I really do. And of course, if you've had a Dogman encounter of your own, that means seeing it with your own eyes, not a buddy's encounter that you want to tell me about secondhand. No, if you've had an encounter with your own two eyes, seeing a Dogman, and would either like to get help from me coming to terms with it, or maybe you'd like to come on the show and share the experience or experiences, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. If you do that, then I'd be more than happy to schedule a phone consultation with you so we could talk about it. But having said all that, thank you everyone again so much for listening and have a great night.